Welcome to Gentle Calm. A lot of people are not struggling because they do not care. They care very much. They want to be consistent. They want to follow through. They want to become the kind of person who keeps promises to themselves. They make plans, set intentions, create routines, and genuinely hope that this time something will hold. And for a little while, it often does. There is a fresh start, a new wave of clarity, a sense that things are finally lining up. You wake up earlier, you return to the habits that matter, you feel more focused, more determined, more in control. Then, slowly, something begins to loosen. The rhythm becomes harder to maintain. The routine starts feeling heavier, small exceptions appear. A few missed days become a week. The structure that felt solid begins to slip, and before long you are left with a familiar and discouraging thought. Why does this keep happening? Why does discipline seem to work for a little while and then disappear? Why do you keep returning to the same pattern of effort, momentum, collapse, and reset? Most people answer that question in a very harsh way. They assume the problem is personal. They tell themselves they are lazy, or weak, or scattered, or incapable of real consistency. They decide they must not want it badly enough. They believe they are missing some essential trait that other disciplined people seem to have. But in many cases, that is not the real problem. The issue is often not that you are incapable of discipline. The issue is that the discipline you are trying to build is standing on something unstable. And anything built on unstable ground will eventually begin to crack. A lot of people think discipline is mostly about force. Push harder, try harder, tighten the system, remove more distractions. Hold yourself to a higher standard, become less emotional, more strict, more efficient. But discipline that depends entirely on pressure rarely becomes durable. It may produce short bursts of control, but it usually does not create steadiness. Pressure can make you move for a while. It can sharpen your focus temporarily. It can even create visible progress. But pressure is exhausting when it becomes the only thing holding your life together. Eventually, the strain shows. What begins as determination often turns into internal friction. The routine stops feeling like something meaningful and starts feeling like something imposed. The structure becomes harder to carry. And when energy drops, the whole thing starts to come apart. This is why so many people are caught in a cycle that looks like discipline but never becomes identity. They can initiate, they can restart, they can create short periods of order, but they cannot seem to make that order stay. And that is because lasting discipline is not created by intensity alone. It is created by structure. This is where the misunderstanding begins. Many people treat discipline like a personality trait, something you either have or do not have, something that belongs naturally to certain people and not to others. But discipline is often less mysterious than that. In many cases, discipline is simply what behavior looks like when your life is organized around something clear enough to hold you steady. If the deeper structure is weak, your discipline will feel inconsistent. If the deeper structure is strong, discipline becomes less dramatic and more natural. That does not mean it becomes easy. It means it becomes less dependent on mood. Think about how many habits collapse not because they are impossible, but because they are floating. They are attached to vague intentions. You want to be healthier, more focused, more productive, more consistent. Those desires are understandable, but they are often too general to carry real weight. They do not always survive fatigue, stress, temptation, or discouragement. The moment life becomes inconvenient, a vague desire loses its force. That is when discipline begins to fall apart. Not because you stop caring, but because caring is not always enough. A person can care deeply about becoming more stable, more capable, more grounded, and still fail to follow through if the behavior is not connected to something deeper than preference. Preference is fragile. It changes with emotion. It bends with circumstance. It weakens when life becomes uncomfortable. A principle is different. A principle does not depend on whether you feel like following it today. A principle gives behavior weight. It gives you a reason that remains intact even when energy disappears. This is why two people can attempt the same habit and have completely different experiences. One person tries to wake up earlier because it sounds like a good idea, because they are trying to improve themselves, because they want to get their life together. Another person wakes up earlier because they have decided that self-respect includes honoring the shape of their day, or because they believe order matters, or because how they begin the morning affects the kind of presence they bring to the rest of their life. From the outside, the habit looks the same, but underneath, the structure is different. One is built on preference, the other is built on principle. And principle endures where preference usually fades. This is why discipline often collapses after the emotional momentum of a new beginning wears off. At the start, motivation creates energy. Novelty helps. Hope helps. The mind feels clear. The future feels possible. You are not yet carrying the full weight of repetition. You are still being helped by the excitement of starting. But real life begins after the excitement leaves. And if your behavior has no deeper support beneath it, the routine begins to feel arbitrary, then burdensome, then negotiable. Negotiation is where discipline starts to weaken. You tell yourself today does not matter that much. Tomorrow can be stronger. One exception is harmless. This week is unusual. You are tired. You are stressed. You need a break. You will reset on Monday. Each individual negotiation seems small, but together they reveal something important. Your behavior is not being held in place by a stable inner structure. It is being constantly redecided. And constantly redecided behavior is hard to sustain. This is one of the hidden reasons discipline feels so exhausting for many people. It is not only that the task itself requires effort. It is that the person keeps having to re-argue with themselves about whether the task matters at all. Every day becomes another conversation. Should I still do this? Is this really necessary? Does it matter today? Can I skip and start again tomorrow? That internal conversation consumes energy before the action even begins. This is why some people feel tired before they have done anything. They are already spending mental energy on renegotiation. But when something is rooted in principle, the conversation becomes quieter. Not because effort disappears, but because the decision has already been made at a deeper level. You are no longer asking whether the habit is convenient. You are asking whether your behavior aligns with what you have already decided matters. That kind of clarity changes the emotional experience of discipline. It moves it away from self-punishment and closer to self-respect. And that distinction matters. Many people try to build discipline from self-criticism. They are disappointed in themselves, so they tighten control. They feel behind, so they increase pressure. They are frustrated with their inconsistency, so they become more aggressive toward themselves. This can create movement for a little while, but it usually does not create trust. And without self-trust, discipline becomes harder to sustain. If your inner life is built on pressure and accusation, then every routine starts to feel like a test you are preparing to fail. Every missed day feels like proof that the harsh voice was right. Every setback deepens the belief that you are fundamentally unreliable. That belief becomes heavy. And eventually, people stop resisting because they are tired not only of the habit, but of the meaning attached to the habit. It no longer feels like a practice. It feels like judgment. That is one reason discipline often falls apart after a period of effort. The person is not just tired physically, they are tired relationally. They are tired of being in conflict with themselves. This is why discipline cannot be built only through control. It also has to be built through coherence. Coherence means your habits are not random demands placed on your life. They make sense inside a larger framework. They fit the kind of person you are trying to become. They are connected to values that remain meaningful even when the immediate reward is absent. When behavior becomes coherent, it stops feeling like a disconnected performance. It becomes part of a pattern that reflects who you are choosing to be. That is when discipline starts becoming more stable. Not perfect, not effortless, but stable. A person who has decided that steadiness matters will relate to consistency differently than a person who is merely trying to do better. A person who sees care for the body as part of self-respect will relate to health habits differently than a person who is only trying to look better or feel less guilty. A person who believes their words should mean something will approach commitments differently than a person who is driven only by temporary motivation. Again, the behavior may look similar from the outside, but the structure beneath it is entirely different. This is why discipline that is built on identity tends to last longer than discipline built on emotion. Emotion rises and falls. Identity clarifies direction. Emotion can start the effort. Identity is what often keeps the effort from dissolving. But even here, there is something important to say. Identity should not mean performance. It should not mean creating a rigid image of yourself that you are terrified to break. That is not stability. That is fear. Real identity is quieter than that. It is not a performance of perfection. It is a chosen center. It is a small set of convictions strong enough to guide behavior across changing conditions. Without that center, discipline becomes situational. You are consistent when the environment supports it, focused when life is calm, strong when motivation is high, clear when the week is not too demanding. But the moment conditions shift, your behavior shifts with them. That does not mean you are hopeless. It means your habits are being governed by circumstances more than by principles. And as long as that remains true, discipline will keep feeling temporary. Many people respond to this by trying to optimize harder. A better app, a stricter schedule, a more detailed system, a cleaner morning routine, a more efficient productivity method. Tools can help, systems matter, structure matters. But no system can permanently hold together a life that is internally undecided. A better planner cannot solve a fragmented inner structure. A more polished routine cannot replace conviction. At some point, the real question is no longer, what is the best method? The real question becomes, what is my discipline serving? That question changes the whole conversation. If discipline is serving image, it will likely become fragile. If it is serving guilt, it will become heavy. If it is serving fear, it will become harsh. But if discipline is serving clarity, integrity, steadiness, self-respect, or responsibility, it begins to take on a different quality. It no longer feels like a war against yourself. It feels like a form of alignment. Alignment is much more durable than force. Force always needs to be reapplied. Alignment has its own quiet momentum. When your habits are aligned with what you truly value, you do not have to manufacture as much drama to keep them alive. You still need effort. You still need repetition. You still need to return after failure. But you are returning to something meaningful, not something arbitrary. That makes a difference. Because discipline will never become stable if it only exists as a temporary reaction to frustration. It has to become part of a deeper way of living. A person who repeatedly starts over may not need more intensity. They may need fewer false foundations. They may need to stop building routines on guilt, urgency, comparison, or short-term enthusiasm. They may need to ask a more foundational question. What in my life is worth being consistent for? Not impressive, not socially rewarded, not temporarily exciting, worth it. What actually deserves steadiness from me? What matters enough that I do not want my behavior to depend entirely on how I feel that day? What kind of life am I trying to reinforce every time I choose not to disappear into convenience? Those are different questions from the ones most people ask, and they lead to a different kind of discipline. A discipline that is quieter, less theatrical, less dependent on motivation, less tied to mood. A discipline that does not need to announce itself because it is rooted in something deeper than performance. This does not mean you will never fail again. You will still have inconsistent days. You will still drift. You will still experience fatigue, resistance, and periods where your structure weakens. But failure will begin to mean something different. It will no longer mean you are incapable of discipline. It will simply mean something in the structure needs attention. That is a far healthier interpretation. Because if every setback becomes an identity verdict, you will always collapse under the emotional weight of trying. But if setbacks become information, then you can respond with more honesty and less shame. You can ask better questions. Was the habit connected to something real or just to a temporary emotional state? Was the structure too ambitious for the season I am in? Was I trying to build consistency through pressure rather than through conviction? Did the routine make sense inside the life I actually live, or only inside the life I imagine while feeling motivated? Those questions lead to rebuilding. Shame usually leads only to another dramatic reset. And dramatic resets are often one more reason discipline keeps falling apart. They create the illusion of transformation without addressing the deeper issue. A calmer approach is often more durable, not lowering your standards, but grounding them, not expecting yourself to become flawless, but making sure your effort is built on something that can actually hold. That is the deeper shift. Discipline is not only about controlling behavior. It is about creating a life where the right behavior has somewhere stable to stand. And when that stability exists, follow-through becomes less about force and more about fidelity. You are not simply forcing yourself to act. You are being faithful to something you have decided matters. That is a very different experience. And it is usually much stronger than temporary motivation. So if discipline in your life keeps collapsing, maybe the question is not, why am I so bad at consistency? Maybe the better question is, what is my consistency built on? If the answer is guilt, fear, pressure, comparison, or urgency, then of course it keeps failing. Those things can generate movement, but they rarely generate steadiness. If the answer becomes principle, clarity, self-respect, and inner structure, then something quieter begins to emerge. Not perfect discipline, but real discipline. The kind that does not depend on constantly starting over. The kind that becomes part of how you live. If this reflection resonated with you, consider subscribing to the channel. Gentle Calm is for people who are tired of living in cycles of pressure, collapse, and self-judgment, and who want something steadier underneath their life. Not just motivation, but clarity. Not just control, but internal order. If this video gave you something meaningful to think about, take a moment to like it. That small action helps this kind of calm, thoughtful conversation reach more people who may be quietly struggling with the same pattern. If you want to go deeper into these ideas, the Gentle Calm book series explores this path from mental noise to internal order to a more durable personal framework. The Gentle Calm Daily Reset Journal offers a simple daily practice for returning to clarity and consistency in a quieter way. And if you prefer slower, more reflective writing, I share weekly essays on Substack where these ideas continue with more depth and space. All of those links are below. Thank you for being here. And as always, stay calm.